Well, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is David Wise, and I am an Olympic gold medalist in the sport of skiing halfpipe. And this is welcome to my home office. And if you see any kids come running through the background, don't be surprised. I have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and no matter how many times I tell them don't jump in on these video chats, they do it anyways. So I'm joined by Matt, and super excited to talk to you guys about a whole array of things, talking about climate advocacy, and just stoked to be a part of this. It's been pretty fun. It's been a cool, enriching experience for me working with POW, because I've always kind of felt like there was no real way to, I don't know, I felt kind of powerless when it came to climate issues and things like that. So Matt Segal is joining me, and yeah, I'm stoked to have you here, man.
Thanks. Yeah, so my Matt Segal, professional climber, been professional climber for about 15 years. I've lived in Boulder, Colorado for just about that same time, and kind of got started off competing, probably similar to how maybe you got started skiing, doing the competitions, and then eventually kind of transitioned to traditional climbing. So climbing at beautiful places like Indian Creek, Yosemite Valley, like you saw in that dope free video that we just watched. And a couple years ago, I founded a coffee company called Alpine Start. We're based here in Boulder. And basically, yeah, I started working with POW too when they kind of moved to the Front Range. And it's been awesome to kind of work with an organization that, cares about our planet and wants to fight for climate change. So once they moved here, I partnered, aligned with them, as well as the business. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I mean, I guess for starters, it's interesting for me. I mean, it's kind of obvious as a professional skier. I've been visiting the glaciers for most of my life. I started traveling because I grew up ski racing before I even got into kind of like you're talking about with your transition into what you're doing now professionally.
Yeah, how do you become an Olympic skier? Like how did
yeah,
that
great question. I grew up in a skiing family. I live in Reno. We lived 45 minutes to an hour from all the big Lake Tahoe ski resorts, and my dad was a ski racer, and my mom was my sisters who are 4 years older than me ski too, so I just kind of followed in their footsteps. But I was always the edgy kid who people knew they could get to do things if they just incentivized it enough. Like, oh, we'll give you $20 to jump that cliff. So I was constantly getting in trouble for either skipping race practice to ski the terrain park or just breaking my race equipment too. I did quite a bit of that. Like I would hit rails on my race skis, which any racer would just cringe at the idea of that, because like your race skis got to be so fast and so perfect. And I would just, I cared. I wanted to be good at racing, but I cared about being off the ground more. So at some point I convinced my dad to let me try out a freestyle team, and got into skiing moguls and aerial, some of the old traditional freestyle events. And then I found half pipe and big air and slopestyle. And I just knew that was for me, man, because you could kind of set your own boundaries and send it as hard as you wanted to. Especially half pipe to me was pretty rewarding, because I might not have had the skills that the guys I was competing with had, but I would send it harder than them. So I was beating guys who were obviously a lot better than me just because I was willing to take the risks and send it.
So yeah, I feel like I got kind of known in climbing for mostly just climbing the routes that nobody else wanted to climb.
Exactly.
Whether it's kind of like difficulty and danger like come together at like really and obscurity. Difficulty, danger, and obscurity came together, and I was like, ooh,
yeah,
that'd be good.
It's interesting because it's a funny way to become a calculated person. People look at me now and they're like, wow, you're so responsible. You're just about to turn 30 and you have 2 kids. Like how does that work in your sport? And I'm like, well, I just sent it really hard for the first half of my life and learned what things don't work. And now I know how to really minimize risk.
Yeah. I feel you.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, like I said, I've visited the glaciers my whole life for training, starting as a 10-year-old, and I've seen them get smaller and smaller, and I've seen the winters. You know, nobody's going to pretend that we don't still have good winters here and there, but there's such a roller coaster when it comes to snowfall and snow quantity and timing and everything else. It seems like the winters are getting later or they're less predictable. So that's obvious for me, but what have you seen as a climber in terms of climate change? Like what convinces you that this is something that you need to speak up about?
Yeah, I mean, I think in similar regards, like conditions in climbing is such a thing. So like you don't want it to be super hot because your hands get sweaty and you grease off. So a lot of these climbing areas, the seasons are getting shorter and shorter because it's getting warmer sooner. And yeah, in other areas, like I've spent a lot of time alpine rock climbing, so on glaciers and stuff like that, but not nearly as high up. Like for example, in like the Bugaboos of British Columbia, like the Bugaboo glaciers, like receded drastically. So you're all of a sudden, what used to be a really mellow approach is now like, you know, a super chossy, like talused gully that's kind of really dangerous to travel. So I've noticed that, as well as just like the warmth, like the days getting way warmer. Like it's kind of funny, like a lot of us climbers are like moving towards climbing not during the day and climbing at night on these like super difficult routes. So I know like we were practicing that on projects, and you know, guys like Tommy Caldwell and Alex Honnold, like on things like LCAP, they're actually climbing a lot of these really difficult pitches like at night with headlamps. And that's really because it's been getting way too warm during the day. The other thing that I feel like we're noticing is we're just noticing the climbing seasons shifting. You know, like October used to be like Centober, right? Like the best conditions, and now October is like in a lot of places is way too warm, and you know it's getting pushed to November and early December for like the prime conditions.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that's my experience is pretty similar. We've gone from, I mean, our first events of the year, the event organizers always want to push the events to the earliest part of the season that they can, because I feel like it's when people are getting most excited about skiing, right? Like when you've been sitting around and you're kind of bored of all the summer activities and you're ready to hang your mountain bike up, that's when people want to host snow sports events, because they're like, oh, you know, this is when people are going to be interested in watching this. And, you know, so they were always scheduling them very late November or early December. And they're just not even trying anymore. Over the last couple of years, they're just like, this is just not like it. 5 years in a row, we've been struggling and trying to make snow so much to get these events off the ground. So yeah, the season is just getting later, and there's nothing anybody can really do about that. Even, you know, I feel like the resorts like to minimize risk as best they can by enabling themselves to make snow as much as possible. But if it doesn't get cold enough to freeze, then you still can't make snow. So even the cheating, you can't cheat nature, man. And it's really interesting and kind of tragic to see how much later winters have been getting, for sure.
Yeah.
So you went and testified at the State House, didn't you? Can you tell me a little bit about that experience? Because I had a similar experience. I think that's kind of cool that we both did in two different places.
I did. So last year I testified on a Colorado bill, HB 1261, and it was basically to reduce carbon emissions in Colorado by 90% by 2050. And man, it was a crazy experience. I kind of took it lightly, I think, in the beginning, and then I got there and was like super nervous. Because I've done a fair bit of public speaking, and when you're talking, for me, you get me going talking about climbing or skiing or something that I'm like, you know, like that I know, that I feel like I know, or I feel like I could hang with, and people that I feel like I could hang with, you know what I'm saying, that get me. I have an easy time talking, but when it comes to like, you know, sitting in front of, you know, people that don't necessarily understand what I'm doing as a climber, it was really challenging, and it was a really long day, and it was pretty nerve-wracking, but at the same time it was like, and when I say long, I mean like it was like 6 hours. Like I believe there might be footage of me dozing asleep because there was like a lot of hills before hours, and we were just sitting there, and it was like hot. I was in a suit. I'm uncomfortable. Like I don't wear suits all the time.
How often do you spend time in a suit?
Yeah, like rarely ever. And but when it came time for me to get up and like and present, I was definitely really nervous just because it's a different audience. But people were really receptive because I think guys like you and we take it for granted, like that we live in the mountains. Like you live for skiing, I live for climbing, we live for like doing this stuff outside, and we surround ourselves by people that like are very like-minded and probably live in these places because of the outdoors. But the rest of our states, like Nevada and Colorado, all these people don't understand what it's like to be a climber or what it's like to be a skier.
Yeah, I feel like they maybe in some senses don't understand what's being lost.
Yeah, totally. They definitely don't understand what's being lost, and I think it's helpful for for them to hear our perspective because we see it firsthand, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that. But yeah, so you testified last year on a bill in Nevada that I believe was kind of similar, right?
Yeah, pretty similar.
What was that like?
It was SB 358, and kind of same thing. Reducing carbon emissions by 50% by what was it, by 2030, and honestly, my experience was pretty similar because I definitely do a lot of different types of public speaking, but this one was, I don't know, it was like a whole new animal because most of the time when I show up to speak, it's because it's with people who want to hear what I have to say. Like they're there to hear me talk about skiing or hear me talk about my experience at the Olympics, and they're almost a captive audience, or at least an invested audience. Whereas these lawmakers don't necessarily know that didn't necessarily know I was going to show up that day, and didn't necessarily want to hear what I had to say, or at least that was my perception in some sense. So it definitely I went into it pretty like fast and free, like, oh yeah, it's mellow. Okay. Oh, what are the points that I need to talk about? All right, I got this. And then I got there and I was like, oh, this is kind of intense. Like there's one person, who's running the whole show, and everything is very to the minute. And okay, we're gonna open up the floor for somebody to come up and speak, and we have our first speakers, and they call you up to the podium, and then you do your little talk. And yeah, it was intense, but I was really, for me, it was really worthwhile. I'm glad to have done it, just because I realized that there's room for a voice there. I kind of see myself as a ski bum. I think of myself that way. I'm like, hey, I'm just trying to make this skiing thing last as long as I can because it's the best job to have.
I feel the same way about climbing.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm just here to keep skiing. You guys are gonna keep paying me to do it. I'm gonna keep going. So I kind of minimize my own voice sometimes, and I think a lot of people do that. They're like, well, I can't have an effect over this. But like, I don't know, that experience was really cool because the governor, it was the state house, so the governor wasn't there, but he was actually watching. He was actually watching me speak, and we hadn't set up a meeting or anything with him ahead of time, or hadn't managed to lock in a meeting ahead of time. And he saw me speaking. He was like, "Oh, I want to see that guy. I want to hang out with him." And so he just wanted to meet me, and so that empowered me to realize, hey, I have a voice, and it's worth saying, just because we do have a unique perspective on the situation. It's worth sharing your voice when you get the opportunity. And I think that that's something that, just to all the outdoor people watching this, that's something that we can say is, just because your voice seems small to you doesn't mean it necessarily isn't something that should be said. Because there's, if anything, we need to have more perspectives on this rather than less. Because the problem is, if people like us stay quiet, then the people who are calling the shots with all the monies are going to be the ones who get to make the rules.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing to like take into consideration is, I guess I had a similar experience where I didn't really speak up that often about things because I felt like I had to be, I wasn't an expert. So I felt like I couldn't talk about anything climate change oriented because I wasn't like a real climate expert. And I don't think that's the case necessarily at all. I think, we're experts in our own right, and we can, share our experiences in the outdoors that will actually make a difference in, showing people what it's all about and showing people like how we see it. Yeah. And on that note, like, so from your perspective, I feel like, climbing and skiing is quite similar in some ways. Like, we both like dedicate our lives to the outdoors, and like we're involved in these communities that are like, everybody's like kind of like lives for their sport or not, or, really enjoys spending time outside. What do you think the best way for the outdoor sports communities, like in general, to be compelling advocates? Like how, like what can other people do,
Yeah, I think you're right. Like you and I are cut from the same cloth. Like we both, I certainly live in the place that I live because I like to be outside as much as possible. And this is where I choose to raise my kids. And the people that I hang out with are people who also like to be outside and do things together and go on adventures and not live a life that's that is dictated by what other people tell us we should or shouldn't do. So I think that just the awareness of the fact that we have a voice, the fact that I don't know, maybe the fact that outdoorsy people are kind of spread out, because we do kind of spread out to the areas where there are less people, makes it seem like there's less of us or something like that. But just recognizing, hey, we have a voice here, and it's worth standing up and making a stand for this. Like we talked about earlier about what's being lost. Like we need to take a stand for what's being lost, because I personally think it's the best way to live your life. I think that being able to go outside and adventure and experience this vast, amazing planet that we have firsthand is the best way to live your life. And the lessons that I've learned from the mountains and taken into my day-to-day life are the most important ones. So I just feel like us realizing and recognizing that we kind of have this, what Powell's calling the outdoor state, where if you look at all the people who are involved in outdoor sports, we actually have a lot of power. We actually have a huge voice, and that we could potentially use for good. I think is amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one of the things that I found kind of so fascinating, that I kind of wear two hats in this situation as like a professional climber. Like I could speak like about like going to the mountains and seeing it, but also as a small business owner, when speaking about climate change and speaking about like, it's, there's money involved in this too, right? I think that's kind of an interesting thing that, for better or for worse, there's money involved, and it's like for us, like, I don't really care that, the outdoor industry is a global $887 billion industry, but some politician's going to care, like some other person's going to care that, in Colorado alone, like it's a $28 billion industry. And ski resorts, that's ski resorts, that's, big brands, like, outdoor brands that are based here. And I think that's that puts it in perspective to people that don't necessarily, that might not think otherwise. You know what I'm saying? When you throw out big numbers like that, you're like, that's a lot of money, and again, it's not about money, but that's a way to like kind of, I found, to like kind of grab people like, yeah, it's a lot of money, but that's also means like we're a lot of people. Right. Like that's like, that equates to like a lot of bodies, like going to ski resorts, buying outdoor gear, like supporting these businesses, so that's a way to show that we have such a huge voice.
Yeah, it's one thing. It seems to me like it's easy to get people interested who know the outdoors and see it themselves. Like your friends and my friends, it's easy to talk them into being involved, because we're like, yeah, this is amazing, and it would be really sad if our kids or our kids' kids couldn't experience this the way that we've been able to. But the people who don't go in the outdoors and live their entire lives in a cubicle aren't going to care until it starts to affect their bottom line. So I like that you tie that in, because the reality is it is a huge, it's going to affect a whole lot of people's bottom line too. Not only is it going to affect our way of life, but it's also going to affect, small business owners and large business owners' way of life too. And just kind of making that connection is amazing. I think that's cool. And
yeah, it's like,
I think it's worth saying too that you don't have to be an expert on every single bill, because dude, I have like some of these bills that I've gone and spoken on. I've had them send me the actual physical bill, and it's like the biggest piece of stack of paper you've ever seen. And I'm not going to read 600 pages of legislation in legal speak, but the resources are out there to figure out what's in it, and just establish yourself on certain points. Action on climate, reducing emissions. You don't have to be an expert in any of this stuff to still use your voice and leverage what you have to say. I think that's important too.
Yeah, totally. I fully agree. And it's okay to be a little scared to like speak up and a little nervous. And on that note, POW Action Fund is doing something a little bit different this year, and they're doing a 2020 lobby camp. So if you would like to participate, it's happening digitally this year because of the current situation. You could text 65351 to get involved. It should be pretty cool. I'm excited about it. I'm going to personally participate in the digital lobbying myself this year, so that should be exciting.
Question.
And
you're about to do that too.
Yeah.
Look at you. You're
Oh yeah, I was going to say, I believe we're going to take questions from people. So
when you went to both the State House to speak, when you both went to the State House to speak up, what was the hardest part, and how did you overcome that? I'll let you go first so I can think.
Yeah. Okay. The hardest part, I would say, was honestly kind of not feeling smart enough to be there, quite frankly. Just like kind of getting out of my comfort zone, putting a suit on, being involved in something that's so out of my element. Like I dedicated almost 2 decades to climbing rocks, not to, wearing a suit and speaking eloquently. But once I kind of broke the ice, I was able to like sit in a room, and you'll notice like in this photo, it's brilliant. It's like we're all like kind of telling jokes and laughing and being ourselves. And it's easy to look at politicians and be like, you're just some cog in this big machine. But they're people too, and they're relatable too. And I think if you show up honest and genuine and who you are, you can always relate with another human.
Yeah, I almost want to just copy and paste your answer, because that's pretty much how it felt for me too. I was overwhelmed. I was nervous, and I didn't feel like I was smart enough to be there either. I think that was a great way to say that. But I also, part of how I've gotten to where I've gotten in my sport is the fact that I just sort of, at some point, if you want to be really good at something, you have to embrace the fact that you need to be willing to be uncomfortable. And like, rather than saying, oh, that's uncomfortable, I'm not going to do it, you say, oh, that's uncomfortable, I'm going to go all in. And that's kind of how I felt going to both going to DC and going to the State House. Was just, wow, I'm just gonna do the best I can. Like you said, show up authentically as yourself. And if it fails, it fails, but just try. And I was equally impressed with the way conversations went, even with politicians that I disagreed with. I was impressed with the fact that we were able to find common ground even in that.
What was your conversation like with the governor?
Oh, it was awesome. It was just, he was giving me a high five. He was saying, absolutely, this is the best thing that you could have done with your day today. And he kind of acknowledged it. He was like, I know for a fact that you could be up skiing or mountain biking or doing a whole lot else with your time right now. But I appreciate the fact that you're here using your voice because you can. And so I felt really, first of all, I didn't feel worthy of such an honor, but I really did feel like it made the day. It was like a highlight on what I thought was a pretty good day already. It was like, wow, even you think that this is worth talking about, and you are glad that I'm here talking about this. I mean, it was definitely it was a humbling moment for sure. I was stoked.
Nice. Another question came in. What makes you optimistic about the future in the face of climate change? I'll take a quick stab briefly. I mean, I think right now there is slowly but surely lots of legislation being passed, which I think is awesome. I think, what really makes me optimistic is looking at, the outdoor communities coming together and really like actually using their voice. The fact that you and I here are having this conversation with, people at home watching it, 5:30 on a Thursday, whatever day it is. They don't really matter.
Who knows what day it is?
Day. It's sunny outside. I think that's I think that makes me super optimistic.
Yeah, just the people. I think it seems like I have this joke with my kids where I talk about like when I start to get really tired, I'm like molten lava. Like when lava comes pouring down the mountain, while it's still hot and fluid, it moves, and then when it starts to slow down, it turns into stone, and then it's obviously there forever. And I feel like that's kind of how the climate conversation has been. It's just this unstoppable thing going in the wrong direction, and now it's starting to slow up and stop, and then eventually we're going to get it going back the other way, like a giant machine. And I feel the rumblings of the machine starting to turn around. So that's what I'm most encouraged about. Like you said, getting people involved, getting more voices involved, and saying, hey, this is worth fighting for.
Yeah, totally agree. And here's another question for you: is how many people in Nevada have gold medals?
That's a little piece of trivia I should know the answer to. I know there's a guy who lives down in Vegas whose name I'm blanking on right now. Terrible fellow Nevadan who won gold in BMX biking. As far as people who are like living in Nevada, that's all I can think of off the top of my head. Yeah, I don't know. Somebody else asked, do you think having kids inspires you to be even more vocal on climate change than maybe if you didn't have kids? I would say definitely yes. And for the most part, most of my like advocacy work has all come after having kids, because it just made the issue that much more pressing to me. I mean, obviously, as a professional skier, it was pressing already because I wanted, like I said earlier, want to keep this gravy train going for as long as I possibly can. But recognizing that, like, being able to grow up skiing is so much a part of who I am and who I've become, and wanting my kids and their kids and their kids' kids to be able to do that is so important. So yeah, it certainly has added weight to the issue for me, for sure.
And there's one question that came in for you. Who or what inspires you to put the time in and dedicate time to the issue?
I feel like I kind of just answered it for my side. What about for you?
Man, I mean, who would be the future, like, I don't have kids, but I would love to have kids one day, I'm sure. So that would be like, what inspires me for the next generation, I would say. And who, I think there's a lot of individuals that inspire me, to dedicate time to this. One off the top of my head, who's another POW ambassador, is Tommy Caldwell. He's been like a huge, like, kind of fan. I've been a huge fan since I was a kid. He lives kind of down the street up in Estes Park, and his climbing and his advocacy kind of speaks for itself. So, yeah. I guess there's one more question. When skiing or climbing, what lesson or antidote can you apply to your work in the climate fight?
That's a very wordy question.
Sorry, I know I read it
what
poorly.
Antidote can you apply to your work poorly? Yeah, I mean, I kind of already said it earlier. Mine is watching the glaciers that I love to ski on in the summer get smaller and smaller and smaller. I just remember summer camp.
I think it's meant like, what has skiing taught you that you could use in the fight?
Oh, very well interpreted, sir. Yeah, that's a good pivot for me, because I was just gonna say some crap that I've already said. I think we already did kind of touch on it too, though, for both of us, where you just have to, at some point, you have to recognize what it is that you want to do, and you just have to punch the throttle, man. You just got to let it rip. So that's the lesson that I would apply from my background is like, hey, I recognize that this needs to change and we need to do something about it. And I'm going to get myself and anybody I can talk into it involved in sending it.
Yeah. And I would say something similar in terms of like, it's okay to be scared. It's okay to be nervous. It's okay to, not do things perfectly. But you kind of have to try. And I think that's like, for me, that's kind of got me to where I am climbing. And I think that's kind of how I try to live my life. And I think that's it for now. I kind of want to thank everybody for tuning in. David, it was awesome meeting you. This is great. And please join us next Tuesday for the next episode of the Outdoor State of Mind series. It's going to be featuring professional fly fisher Hilly Hutchinson, who I've met before, who's amazing, as well as author and outside writer Heather Hensman. Awesome. And they're going to dive into water and climate. So I think that's it for us here, and we're going to leave you with a little video. It's of me speaking in Denver. You could see how nervous I was. And that's it. I hope everybody has a great night, and thanks for chiming in.
Thanks, everybody.
As climbers, we have to pay close attention to the conditions around us, as our lives often depend on it. On expeditions, we function as a team, and it is our responsibility to report back to our partners and our community, giving them crucial information they need to make the best decisions possible. That is exactly what compels me to speak to you today. My North Face teammate and world-famous mountaineer, Conrad Anker, said best, "Nature gives us warnings, and we need to respond, smartly and quickly, with no hidden agendas." The bill before you today is an opportunity to address our changing climate by setting ambitious goals to reduce carbon pollution. As an athlete, I urge you to pass the bill for our environment. As a small business owner within Colorado's $28 billion outdoor recreation economy, I urge you to pass the bill to protect our industry's future and the 229,000 Coloradans it employs. In the mountains, it's clear. Conditions are changing for the worse. I urge you to take my community's report into account and make the best decision possible, passing Bill 1261. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Segal. Justin.